Welcome, everyone. What we're going to be talking about today is something that's really important to understand in order to secure our SharePoint environments. It's an inbuilt data exfiltration tool, all within SharePoint. Okay, well, maybe that's taking things to the extreme. However, there is just one button that a threat actor needs to press in order to download the entire contents of a SharePoint site to their local device. That is pretty concerning. So it's really important that we understand this attack scenario, how to prevent it from happening, and also how to investigate it in our own environments. The feature that we're going to be talking about is known as SharePoint Sync, and you've probably actually used it in some capacity before, however didn't know. The common use case for this feature is the OneDrive desktop application. You can access all of your OneDrive's contents all conveniently within File Explorer. The whole purpose of this functionality is geared towards productivity, and it does keep users productive. They can access all of their files through their File Explorer window when they're traveling or they experience it in limited internet connectivity. Well, that same concept applies, except with a SharePoint site. So imagine instead of your OneDrive's contents, you can access a full SharePoint site's contents all within your File Explorer. There's two main methods to perform a sync within SharePoint. The first is actually something you've probably seen before. Within a browser window, when you're accessing a SharePoint library, there's a sync button right there. It's as easy as pressing that button. However, there's an admin feature to hide that button. And hiding that button doesn't actually stop an end user or a threat actor from performing a sync. It just simply hides the button. There's a second option, which is adding a shortcut to the user's OneDrive. And that effectively adds a link to the SharePoint site's contents within the user's OneDrive. And if they were to sync their own OneDrive document library to their device, that same SharePoint site's contents will also be accessible on their device. This is the page that I was talking about before. We are within a SharePoint site on a browser window. We can see that sync button. If we were to click that sync button, we'll get a couple of pop-ups. The first one saying we're going to start syncing your files. The second one will actually start the OneDrive desktop application, and you'll be prompted to sign in. That sign-in process, if this were a malicious threat actor, more than likely they already have that end user credentials. We presented with the SharePoint site's contents within a File Explorer window. However, here's the tricky part. These files are what's called files on demand, which means that frequently used files or recently used files will actually reside on that local device. However, the contents are not stored completely on the device. There is a feature which we can quickly enable and which will download all of the site's contents. So if we go to right click, always keep files on the device, that will ensure that those files are downloaded. Now let's work through the second method. You can see a second option, which is called add shortcut to OneDrive. So selecting that option, we'll actually add a shortcut to that SharePoint site's contents into our OneDrive. Now we can see that there's a folder called the SharePoint site's name. Navigating into that folder, we'll present it with those site's contents, and we can repeat that same process of selecting right click and selecting always keep on device to perform a full download of that SharePoint site's contents. Where exactly does this leave us now? It leaves us in a pretty bad spot, especially when we start to consider the scenario where this might actually play out. A typical user is compromised by a phishing email. A threat actor identifies a SharePoint site with sensitive information and subsequently syncs that full SharePoint site's contents to their local device. Now, that full SharePoint site's contents is on their device. That includes probably some sensitive information of your organization. And where this gets particularly concerning is the trend that we've seen in ransomware. Ransomware is no longer about just locking up your file system. It's primarily an extortion form of attack now. So this is an extortion style attack scenario in the cloud. So it's really important that we consider this attack scenario in our environments and stop it before it happens. Let's put a stop to this. The first and most aggressive control that we can implement is straight up blocking offline client availability for a SharePoint site. This can be a really useful feature if a site has sensitive content that you definitely don't want on a local device, or your organization might actually determine that this is a suitable control for all SharePoint sites. The second control is allow listing a set of Active Directory domains. So you can specify these are the Active Directory domains that our devices are enrolled and joined, and they can only sync and access SharePoint content locally from those domains. The third, and this does take a little bit of a journey towards getting to, is when you have your devices Intune enrolled and they're managed devices, you can only allow SharePoint site content to be downloaded from a managed device. This is probably the control that you want to aim towards getting through for a lot of M365 conditional access policies. Restricting access to the whole M365 suite of things to manage devices is highly effective. From an investigative perspective, there are log sources available to help understand an incident when a sync has occurred. The first thing that we should talk about is for a sync to occur, there needs to be a sign-in to the OneDrive desktop application. So we can look for sign-in events to the OneDrive desktop application from suspicious IP addresses or IP addresses already attributed to threat actor activity. From there, we can work to understand the items that are affected from that sync. There's an operation within the unified audit log known as file sync downloaded full. Looking at that operation, we can understand the file names, the file sizes, and also the IP address where those sync actually occurred from. So that helps understand the data that is affected from a sync occurring. Whilst this is useful post-incident, it's also useful pre an incident. You can consider, okay, these are the log sources that are available when this occurs. Can we develop some detection opportunities within our own environment? This is starting to look at the different means, both from a control perspective, but also a detection perspective that you can implement for this attack scenario. Thank you very much for watching this video. The main thing that I was trying to highlight from this video is that this is a very real attack scenario, and more organizations are moving their sensitive information towards SharePoint. So it's really important that we secure this environment appropriately. I've also created a blog, so everything that we've talked about today is included in written format on that blog, as well as some additional controls and detection opportunities on that blog site. I'll link that in the comments below. But thanks again for watching this video.